When life gets unpredictable, preparation matters. In medicine, it's all about staying alert, ready for whatever comes through the door. On the road, it's no different. That's why Volvo designs vehicles to help anticipate risk, reduce harm, and protect lives. The Volvo XC90's advanced safety systems inspire confident decisions wherever the road takes you. The Volvo XC90, for life. Proud sponsor of the Pit Podcast. Learn more at volvocars.ca/safety.
A new study suggests that Quebec's education system may harbor systemic racism in schools, a revelation which seems to be impacting Black youth. The study says that teaching approaches in Quebec schools are causing some Black youth to feel excluded. Alongside this, one of the researchers notes that a lot of teachers have an implicit bias and presuppositions about Black people, which come out in their teaching. Now, the researchers who conducted the study are calling on pedagogical practices to change. Let's go now to Lerona Dana Lewis from the University of Ottawa, an assistant professor there who led this study. Lerona, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lerona,
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, let's talk about this. First off, I want to talk about the parameters of this study. How many Black youth you talked to were in this study? How long this study took? Why don't we paint the picture for our audience about this study?
Okay, so first of all, the study was initiated by the LaSalle Multicultural Resource Center. It's a nonprofit organization in LaSalle, and they serve the community, and they've noticed the difficulties that Black youth were experiencing in school. So they applied and got a grant from Heritage Canada to do this. There were 13 parents, 14 youth between the ages of 12 and 14, and 3 over 18, 11 teachers and administrators. The majority were Anglophone, 27, and 14 were Francophone. So in total, we had 41 participants who were eligible for participation at the end of the process of data gathering.
And so how did you conduct the study? So it was interviews primarily throughout the process?
Yes, so this is a qualitative study. And so it's based on the idea that racism is an ordinary experience that Black people encounter in their everyday lives. So the purpose was not to find out whether or not racism exists. The purpose was to see how this ordinary everyday experience of racism manifests in school by listening to parents, teachers, and youth themselves. So it was a qualitative study with interviews conducted with the participants, and we analyzed it using a qualitative data analysis software, which I'm not going to advertise freely.
Yeah.
But and so we developed codes, categories, and themes, and then finally we were able to see some of the ways that students felt excluded or were experiencing instances of racism in school.
So let me ask you this. Why do you think the LaSalle Multicultural Resource Center said we need to do this now? Why do you think, or maybe they've told you, what led them to say we need to do this study?
Well, one of the people that approached me to become involved in the study, her name is Gloria Ann. She's a psychologist, registered psychologist, and so she volunteers with LMRC. She speaks a lot to parents and kids experiencing difficulties in school. And one of the things she herself talked about was the high police presence in one of the schools in the area. And that was kind of shocking for her. And over the years, we've known that clearly in the literature, there have been many studies indicating the difficulties that Black youth face in school. So there are a number of factors that led them to want to conduct this study.
We're with Lerona Dana Lewis from the University of Ottawa, an assistant professor there who led a study on systemic racism in Quebec schools. So let's talk about the results. What did you find?
So what we found, first of all, it's important to highlight that many students said that they were enjoying school, that they had a good relationship with their teachers, and that they appreciated when they were having difficulties in school, they could go to their teachers during the lunch break or after school to get extra help. So I just want to highlight that this is not something that we're saying that all teachers are to blame for what the students are experiencing. What we did find, basically, students felt that issues related to the Black experience were being ignored in school. And if they were being addressed, they were not being addressed in a careful manner that took into consideration possibly the emotional impact of what was being discussed. So we can give an example, and in sharing the example, some people might think it's an anecdote, but it's one of the examples across the theme that we've developed. So one of the students felt that the issues of Black people were being ignored, and that student recounted that a classmate of hers was indicating to her that the George Floyd video was a deep fake. It wasn't real, and she felt really upset about that. It was not discussed in her school, and so she was left to kind of process it on her own. The students, Black, white, all the students were left to process this occurrence on their own because it didn't become part of the classroom discussion, granted that the classroom would have been online at the time. And so the students felt, so for me, the takeaway from that is we need to make sure that our students are getting good critical media literacy skills so that they are able to interpret what they read and see in the media. And two, that from taking it from a pedagogy of caring, the teachers can say, this event has happened because the students reported that they discussed other events, but when it came to this particular event, it was not talked about in that particular school.
And I want to talk about solutions here, just because you brought up media literacy here, right? As something that's lacking in this situation. So would you say through your study you have potential leads on solutions to fixing this problem, to fixing how Black youth feel in Quebec school system?
Well, I think the solutions have been out there for a very long time, but it's whether or not there is the will, first of all, to acknowledge that there is systemic racism happening in school, that there's anti-Black racism happening in school. So the first step would be to acknowledge that it is existing in schools. And when we think about it, when we are doing teacher training, because I've been a teacher educator for some time, we think about how can we teach the subjects, the core subject areas, to include the Black perspective. So not only in history, but in science, right across the curriculum so that students do not feel excluded. We also think about when we're asking students questions in the classroom, the ways that students can feel excluded. So, for example, one of the students recounted an instance when the teacher asked her a question, she knew the answer, and then the teacher responded basically that she was surprised that she knew the response to the question. Mm-hmm. So here we're thinking, what is the role or purpose of the question? Questioning in teaching has a specific pedagogic role. And if you're going to ask the student the question and then report that you're surprised that the student knew the answer, why did you ask the student the question? What was the role of the question? So there are several teaching strategies that can be looked at to help students feel more included within the classroom, especially within the dialogue that takes place in the classroom. Learning takes place through dialogue, and that dialogue should be constructive and not take place in a way that makes students feel excluded.
Lerona, obviously in Quebec, the notion of systemic racism has become a contentious one because the Quebec government doesn't acknowledge systemic racism. They say racism exists, but there's not systemic racism, right? So I want to ask you to wrap up this interview, how important something like that would be. And I wonder if you've looked at other places to compare the Quebec education system with other places. Do places maybe in Canada that acknowledge systemic racism, that make that more of a core part of education, do they have better outcomes? Do we have any indication of that, if something like that would help?
That is a very interesting question, and I'm not familiar with the research that says that if we acknowledge systemic racism, that the student's outcome would be better. I think that what we do know is that students will feel included. When they feel included, they will participate more, they'll be motivated to succeed. the harm that comes to students is emotional, and it affects them in ways that may not be apparent. So I can say, for example, what if the student who the teacher said kind of embarrassed reacted differently? That could have gone in a way of a disciplinary problem. In this case, the student did not react in a way that could have led to an escalation of the situation. So really it is about thinking from a pedagogy of caring, which was written about in the 1990s. So this is an ongoing conversation. It's not new, the experience of Black children in school. But if we think about teaching Black students from a pedagogy of caring, what will it mean? That to me is a solution. If we care for people, we are interested in their success, and we take care in the actions and in the statements that we make towards them within the classroom. We try to include all students in the classroom, and we focus on, is what I'm doing or saying going to cause particular students or groups of students to feel excluded? If so, how can I change it? How can I do or say what I'm doing differently? So I think, granted that there may not be an immediate acknowledgement of systemic racism, taking it from the perspective of critical race theory, which is contentious in itself in some places, racism is an ordinary everyday experience for Black people. Black children will face this in school. How can we minimize the pain and hurt that Black kids face in school? To me, that's the most important question.
Lerona,
And
no, I'm sorry, Lerona. We do have to leave the interview there, but I'll tell you this. Maybe you can come on in a future edition of the show so we can talk about also outcomes here, right? And how this kind of thing affects outcomes throughout life. So thanks for coming on the program this morning. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, LMRC. On behalf of LMRC, thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure, Lerona. Thanks so much. That's Lerona Dana Lewis from the University of Ottawa, an assistant professor who led this study.